The story takes place in the city of Ebelstein, and there lived a figure known as the Old Lear. He was just a slum dweller and could only use 1-star magic, the weakest there is, but even though he was weak, he bragged all over town, claiming to be a great mage. On top of that, he had a terrible temper and would beat up any kid who got on his nerves. And one of these kids living in the slums is our MC, and it was from that crabby old man that he learned how to use magic. Their relationship didn't start for some noble reason, but rather a simple exchange of needs. The old man just wanted someone to listen to his stories and feel important. In return, our MC needed knowledge, and so a deal was struck. After a long time together, our MC was already able to use mana, and he had excellent control over it. Seeing this, the old man is surprised to see that he could feel the flow of mana much faster than normal. And while meditating, the MC unexpectedly opens his eyes. A large amount of mana begins to gather in his hand. He then fires a mana arrow and hits the tree dead on. That was completely unexpected, leaving the old man stunned by the boy's talent. And that's how, after a year of doing all sorts of chores for the old man, our MC became a 1-star mage. At night, they would talk around the campfire. The drunk old man would comment on how nobles could reach 3 stars before they were even adults. And that's why he warned our MC not to get a big head, because with his skills, he'd barely even reach 2 stars. Because when it came to magic, bloodline was everything, and no matter how hard he tried, it would be useless. This idea that there was a barrier between nobles and commoners was something the old man always talked about, perhaps due to his own frustrations. That night, the MC felt that the night was longer than usual, and the next day a heavy rain began to fall. When the MC returned to their spot, he found the old man on the ground, lifeless. His master's body was covered in marks as if he had been beaten up badly. He thought the old man had gotten into a fight and taken a nasty beating, but the truth was different. The truth is, the old man didn't pick a fight. He was beaten by the city guards. The reason for all this was that the old man was caught trying to steal a 2-star spellbook from a warehouse. The MC is confused because an old man with 0 ambition like him wouldn't do something like that. Suddenly, a system screen appears in front of him as he remembers how the old man always talked about the importance of bloodlines, but our MC knows that this rule about noble blood doesn't apply to him. Before him, the system screen informs him that he has unlocked the basics of magic and needs to choose his main school, but the truth is, he's not originally from this world. From there, 4 years go by and a lot changes. During this time, our MC meets a woman named Quesa Flameheart. She was the former head of the now failed House Flameheart, a viscountess, and also a 3-star mage who was highly sought after by mercenary groups. During her stay in Ebelstein, she took on contracts through the Belden Mercenary Corps and ended up teaching our MC, who had joined the group at a young age using only 1-star magic. With her help, the young mage learned a lot from Quesa, who was a 3-star mage. The story then takes us to the Belden's Tier Tavern. Inside, Quesa talks to the MC, saying it's normal for a mage to want to evolve and that he has the talent for it. However, she also warns him that too much greed can end up hindering his progress. The young mage then agrees and says he'll remember her advice. Quesa then asks the MC to close his eyes and feel his mana. She instructs him to feel where the mana is generated, its flow, and how to use that energy to turn imagination into reality. The young mage obeys, and a blue aura surrounds him while his master watches him intently. Quesa notes that he has a considerable amount of mana, and that his control is stable, likely due to his field experience. Suddenly, Derek's eyes glow, and he begins overflowing with power. His master is completely shocked by what she's seeing. Right after, a blast of energy goes off inside the tavern. Everyone in the place gets spooked by the noise and has no idea what happened. They start wondering if they're under attack, and someone yells to check outside while Derek looks at his hands, confused. Faced with the situation, Quesa grabs her apprentice's hand and tells him not to say a word and just follow her. Outside, the guards are already investigating the sound of the explosion, and Quesa leads Derek away from there. The two hurry down an alleyway to avoid being seen. The MC, still confused, calls out to his master once more. Quesa then stops and turns around with a serious expression, telling Derek to listen very carefully. Derek simply nods. Quesa explains that nobles are very sensitive when it comes to their privileges, and magic is the biggest one. Because of this, innate strength is treated as a blessing that only applies to nobles, as it's nearly impossible for a commoner to reach 3 stars. She adds that the commoners who do reach that level have dedicated their entire lives to magic, and then comments on what the MC just used. The mentor reveals that the explosion was caused by a 2-star illusion spell called auditory hallucination. And that's how, at 14 years old, the young man became a 2-star mage, with a system screen confirming his new ability. After this event, Quesa traveled with the young man, teaching him various spells and also about how high society worked. A year passed, and the mentor had to say goodbye to her apprentice. He found out that the county of Elvester had appointed her as a private tutor for a family so influential that even the Grand Duke of the capital respected them. Given the situation, this was an offer Quesa couldn't refuse. After all, becoming the magic teacher for a noble of that level was a huge blessing anything for anyone. Before leaving, Keisha left a 2-star spellbook as a gift for her student. The MC then sits on his bed with the newly acquired book in his hands. Another year passed, and during this time the young man studied on his own and mastered 2 more 2-star spells. At just 16 years old, he was already quite strong and had no intention of stopping there. Back at the Belden's Tier Tavern, a man approaches Derek with good news, saying they finally got a decent request. The MC, sitting at the bar, asks what kind of request it is. The man reveals that the request comes from House Duplane, the Grand Duchy, and asks if the young man understands how important this is. Our MC is surprised and questions why such a powerful house would hire a small group like theirs. The guild master gets all excited, saying that the Duplane family spends gold like there's no tomorrow. He then grabs Derek by the collar, explaining that this job could open a lot of doors and create valuable connections for the future. The MC then asks what the Duplane family wants them to do. The master replies that the mission is simple: just take down some monsters on the outskirts of the Grand Duke's territory, and the man guarantees the nobles are trustworthy. Derek, however, finds the whole story super suspicious, as it makes no sense for such a big family to hire a mercenary group for such a simple job. Because of this, he refuses the offer and starts to leave the tavern, but the guild master asks him to wait. The MC looks back and reinforces that he doesn't take jobs that seem sketchy. The man gets desperate, explaining that he needs Derek because the client specifically requested a mage and their rare and mercenary corpse. He insists that the young man is the only one who can take the mission, but Derek remains suspicious and says he doesn't want to get tangled up in unnecessary trouble. Seeing that the young man's stubbornness won't budge, he tosses something at Derek. He offers a gold coin as an upfront payment to try and convince the MC to take the job. Derek examines the gold coin in his hands and ends up accepting the mission. Sometime later, he's introduced to his clients a butler, a maid, and a hooded girl. The guild master formally introduces him, but the butler immediately refuses the young man's help. The client complains that Derek is just a kid who hasn't even had his coming of age ceremony and says he can't believe they're sending someone so young for the job. The man tries to defend his mage, saying he's the best he knows, but the butler isn't convinced. He turns to leave, stating that the task is not for a child. The maid then whispers something to the butler. The butler and the maid then start staring at the hooded girl. She then calls his name and asks if they can talk for a bit. The scene cuts to the Grand Duchy of Duplane, where the mission is about to begin. In the middle of the forest, a goblin is hit by a magic attack. Derek, with his bright red eyes glowing intensely, prepares for the next battle. He moves with agility and takes down another monster with no difficulty. A goblin tries to attack him from behind, but the MC notices in time. He easily dodges the attack and counters with his sword. After defeating the last goblin, the MC looks over the battlefield covered with enemies. Soon after, he uses his magic to wipe out all the remaining monsters in a blast of blue energy. With the battle over, Derek approaches the clients and informs them that the job is done. The butler and the maid are visibly impressed with the young man's efficiency. The hooded girl smiles and comments that he defeated so many enemies in the blink of an eye. Back at the tavern that night, the mood is totally different. A blonde girl named Pelling confronts Derek, accusing him of becoming a noble's lapdog. The guild master tries to calm the situation while the girl climbs onto the bar, saying they shouldn't stoop so low. He tries to calm her by mentioning the payment, but Pelling only gets more irritated. The man then makes a sign with his fingers to show the amount, and the girl thinks it's just 1 silver coin. With a confident smile, the guild master reveals the true value of the payment. Pelling's expression completely changes when she finds out the payment is 1 gold coin. Thrilled, she throws herself on the floor, begging to lick the noble's boots too, but the man tells her to shut up. After all the commotion, Pelling passes out from excitement on the table, and the man asks how the request went. Derek replies that it was nothing special, and that the client's first impression wasn't great, but they seemed to have a lot of money. The MC reveals that the 3 clients were lying the whole time. The guild master is surprised, and Derek begins to explain what he noticed. He says that the noble was looking for someone with youth, stamina, and social skills, but the butler had none of those qualities. Plus, the maid's hands were too clean for someone who does hard labor. During the mission, the maid offers Derek a handkerchief, and he notices how well cared for her hands are. The hooded girl, on the other hand, seemed to be the real inspector in training. Derek remembers how she was analyzing him closely the entire time. The man interrupts the young man's analysis, saying they're just mercenaries and don't need to investigate their clients. What's important is doing the job and getting paid. The MC agrees, but his expression shows he's still suspicious. He knows that Jaden is right and that the most important thing is to make a living. The next day, at the Grand Duchy of Duplane, the mission session continues. Derek informs the clients that all the goblins have been eliminated and that they shouldn't be back for a good while. The butler praises their work, and the guild master gets ready to receive the payment. The man gets excited seeing the gold coins. He approaches Derek all happy, showing off the 2 gold coins, but the MC pushes him away with his hand. Seeing the guild master's excitement, the butler clears his throat to get their attention. He then addresses Derek and offers him a new job, praising the young man's skills highly. The guild master is confused, but the butler ignores him and keeps talking. He offers 15 gold coins for the new service, leaving the man shocked at the amount. The butler asks if Derek accepts the proposal. The MC, with hesitating, says yes. They set off in a carriage toward the Grand Duke's residence. Upon arrival, they are met with a huge, luxurious palace. The guild master and Derek are impressed by the grandeur of the place. Before they enter, the butler decides to introduce himself formally, but Jaden casually interrupts him. The butler introduces himself as Dylan, the head butler of Grand Duke Duplane, and apologizes for hiding his identity. Jaden is flustered by the revelation and wonders what to do. The woman accompanying them introduces herself as Katerina, the head maid of the Grand Duke. Jaden then bows and introduces himself as the captain of the Belden mercenary corps. Derek realizes his suspicions were correct and that the two held very important positions. Next, the hooded girl approaches them, and the MC looks at her with curiosity. The MC stares intently at the young woman, trying to figure out who she really is. She removes her hood, revealing her true identity. Derek stares at her, surprised as he waits for the revelation. The young woman introduces herself as Aiseline Eleanor Duplane, the eldest daughter of House Duplane, and says she wants to hire Derek as a magic tutor for her younger sister, Diala. The MC is in shock at the proposal to become a noble's tutor. Meanwhile, at the Duplane residence, the atmosphere is tense. A young man storms into the Grand Duke's office in a rage. He barges in shouting, telling his father and Valerian to look at what happened. The Grand Duke, sitting at his desk, scolds him for his lack of manners and tells him to behave with dignity. The young man, named Reg, points to a crying maid and says it's Diala who needs manners because she crossed the line and assaulted one of his staff members. The maid continues to cry silently while Reg defends her. Valerian intervenes, telling Reg to lower his voice because he and the Grand Duke are in the middle of an important conversation. Reg ignores the request and continues to complain, saying that more than 10 servants have quit in the last month and that Diala breaks things whenever she wants. He approaches his father's desk and asks how long he's going to ignore Diala's behavior. Valerian shouts Reg's name, trying to contain the situation that is spinning out of control. Valerian, with a serious expression, tells Reg to stop making a scene and to leave the office. Reg turns to him in silence but clearly irritated. He then tells his father that even if Diala is useless, they still have Aiseline. The young man suggests it's time to get rid of Diala once and for all. The Grand Duke interrupts him, saying that decision is not his to make. Reg insists that he has already found a monastery for her, and that it would be better for the family to get rid of this burden. Suddenly, the Grand Duke grabs Reg's head with force and slams him violently to the floor. He repeats that the decision is not Reg's. With a furious expression, Reg, on the floor and hurt, says that his father will have to make a decision eventually. The Grand Duke glares at him with a cold, determined look. Meanwhile, Aiseline and Derek walk through the palace corridors. Aiseline asks if he's heard of her sister Diala, and the MC replies that he saw her in the family register. She confirms this and says that Diala isn't well known to the public. They arrive at a large door and prepare to enter. Suddenly, Valerian appears in the hallway, helping Reg walk, and Aiseline calls out to him. Valerian turns with a smile and greets the young lady, asking how her experience in Ebelstein was. Aiseline politely replies that thanks to his care, she lived very well. He then explains that he needs to take Reg to get his injuries treated, and that they can talk more calmly later. Our MC observes the whole scene with his bright red eyes glowing intensely. He realizes that the situation here seems pretty tense, especially with Reg all beaten up. Derek analyzes the environment, trying to understand what just happened in that place. His gaze then turns to the maid who is still crying in a corner of the hallway. The young mage begins to realize that the Duplane family has a lot of internal problems to solve. Soon after, they enter the Grand Duke's office, who says he's relieved to know his daughter was well. Aiseline thanks him and introduces Derek as the new magic tutor who will be looking after Diala. The Grand Duke stares at the boy with a serious, appraising look, as if measuring his worth. The young lady says they will take their leave, as she knows her father is busy, and prepares to exit. However, before they leave the room, the Grand Duke tells the MC to stay. Derek turns around, not understanding why he was asked to remain there. The scene takes place in the Grand Duke's office, a very luxurious and imposing place. The older man is sitting at his desk, writing something with a quill. He stops what he's doing and comments on Derek's youth, asking if he's really 16. RMC, sitting on the sofa, simply confirms his age. The Grand Duke then questions if the boy can use magic, and he replies that he has mastered a little bit of one-star magic. The man chuckles and adjusts his glasses as if he found the young man's answer amusing. He then tells Derek that there's no reason to lie, as humility isn't always a virtue. The young mage remains silent, just observing the noble's reaction. Suddenly, a powerful blue aura surrounds the Grand Duke, and Derek realizes he's in the presence of of a 5-star mage, understanding that being humble won't work on him. Because of this, Derek apologizes if he seemed disrespectful, but the man says he understands why he acts that way, since having a lot of talent can be dangerous. The Grand Duke sizes him up and says that given his age and clothes, he doesn't look like a magic tutor. The MC then reveals bluntly that he's a mercenary. The older man says he won't investigate further since it was Aisline who chose him, and therefore he will allow him entry into the annex where Diala lives. He dismisses him, telling a maid to guide him, but Derek asks to ask a question before he leaves. The Grand Duke, with a serious expression, allows the young man to ask his question. Derek then explains that as a mercenary, it is his duty to see the mission through to the end. He adds that he was hired by Aisline to teach Diala magic and help her enter high society. The Grand Duke stares at him with a serious expression and asks why he's stating the obvious. Our MC reveals that he has a very important request to make of him. Faced with the situation, the older man is confused, not understanding what the young man wants. Meanwhile, in the annex of the residence, a plate is thrown forcefully across the room. The object shatters against the wall, and a maid screams, completely terrified by the scene. She apologizes desperately to Diala, who asks her if an apology is going to change anything. The young noble tells the servant to get out of her sight and threatens her, saying that next time she'll throw the plate at her face. The scene cuts back to Aisline talking with Valerian, who asks why she chose Derek out of so many people. He argues that the Duplane family should have a line of available tutors, and that a commoner would have trouble teaching a noblewoman. Aisline explains that she has already tried to hire almost every famous mage on the continent, but they all gave up in the end, so she decided to look for someone in a desperate situation. She continues, saying that although Derek is a mercenary, he seems to understand the culture and behavior of nobles, probably because of his former master, who was a failed noble. The young woman concludes that she found the boy refined and gentle, and that's why she believed he could handle Diala calmly. Valerian laughs and advises Aisline to learn to see people better, leaving her confused by the comment. Valerian explains that Derek is a mage who grew up on the streets and became a mercenary before even coming of age, and therefore he doubts someone like that would have survived just by being gentle. Aisline remains silent, processing his words and realizing she might have misjudged the young man. While this conversation is happening, the MC is being guided by a butler and a maid through the palace corridors. He finally arrives at a huge door where his new student, Diala, awaits. The young mage then raises his hand, preparing to knock and announce his presence. With firm knocks, he raps on the bedroom door, waiting for a response. Derek remains outside with a serious, focused expression, waiting to be received. After getting no response, he decides to open the door himself. Upon entering the room, the young man greets the young woman, who is sitting with her back to him. He introduces himself as Derek and excuses himself as he approaches the girl. Diala, the second daughter of House Duplane, without turning around, tells him to come closer. Our MC walks toward her, curious to finally meet the famous problem child. Suddenly, the young woman turns with a mischievous smile on her face, staring at the young man. In a swift move, she throws the contents of her cup directly in his face. Derek stands there, completely soaked, with liquid dripping from his hair, receiving a not-so-friendly welcome from his student. With a mocking smile, Diala says the situation is awful, because she thought a sewer rat had entered her room. Next, the girl asks if he's the mercenary the butler mentioned, but then immediately calls him a sewer rat again. The young noble leans on a nearby piece of furniture, preparing for her next taunt. She then climbs onto a small table to be in a higher position than him. Soon after, Diala grabs a bucket and dumps all the dirty water on the young man's head, saying it should remind him of home. Derek continues to stand there in silence as the filthy water runs down his body. The girl complains that the water ran out and that it was a shame the fun was over. At that moment, our MC's expression changes and his red eyes show his irritation. Diala is completely surprised to see his reaction, as she didn't expect him to stare back at her. She screams furiously, asking how he dares to look at her like that, and kicks him hard. The young mage is knocked to the floor by the kick, while the noblewoman stands there with her hands on her hips. The girl mutters something angrily and starts to walk away from him. With a disgusted look, she covers her nose and says that he stinks. Derek, on the floor, glares at her with a cold, determined look, showing that he will not tolerate the abuse any longer. The young noblewoman turns and leans against a table, still with a look of contempt on her face. With a mocking smile, the young noble tells him to know his place and questions how a sewer rat like him could possibly teach her. The scene then returns to the office where the Grand Duke is staring thoughtfully out the window. He seems to be reflecting on the conversation he had with his daughter's new tutor. Derek explains that his presence there shows that Diala's problem is serious, and for that reason, he has a request. The MC asks directly how much authority he will have to teach the young noble. The older man stares at him with a serious, thoughtful expression, analyzing the young man's audacity. Back in the present, Diala is on the floor with a red mark on her face, completely shocked. It turns out the young mage retaliated against the aggression and is now standing in front of her with an intimidating look. The girl looks at him, unable to believe what just happened, as no one had ever dared to touch her. She brings a hand to her face, feeling the sting of the blow. still in a state of shock. With a cold gaze, Derek simply tells her to get up off the floor. The story takes us 3 years into the past, with the MC traveling in a wagon. He asks his master, Quesa, what she would do if she had to teach a stubborn student who didn't respond to kindness. The mentor replies that she would try to understand the student and embrace them, so they would feel accepted. Derek finds the answer too idealistic and questions what to do with a student who can't be reached that way. Quesa explains that the essence of teaching is to guide the student in a better direction, and if communication fails, a new starting point must be found. With a grim expression, the mentor reveals that this different starting point is to simply engrave fear into the student. Back in the present, Diala is still on the floor with her hand on her face, in complete disbelief. Derek then tells her to treat others with respect and orders the girl to get up without him having to repeat the command. The young noble pushes herself up from the floor, starting to rise, still with a furious expression. However, as she gets up, she tries to attack the MC in a swift, desperate move. Diala screams indignantly, questioning how a commoner like him dares to lay his hands on her. Before she could finish her sentence, the young mage hits her with another slap across the face. He warns that he won't repeat himself again and makes it clear that she will learn to treat others with consideration and respect. The girl glares at him with a mocking smile, not believing the young man's audacity. Immediately after, she starts screaming for the head butler, accusing the commoner of assaulting her. Dylan rushes into the room with 2 maids and asks if his lady is all right. The butler turns to Derek and furiously confronts him about what he's doing, threatening that the Grand Duke will hear about this. Our MC, however, remains calm and pulls a scroll from his clothes. He shows the document with the official seal and reveals that the Grand Duke has given him full authority over Diala's education, allowing him to use whatever method he deems best. Using a monocle, Dylan examines the document and is left speechless upon confirming the Grand Duke's signature. Diala also looks at the paper, completely shocked, as she can't believe her father gave so much authority to a stranger. Night falls over the Duplane residence, and the moon illuminates the sky as the chaos continues inside. Elsewhere in the palace, Valerian runs furiously through the corridors while Reg desperately tries to calm him down. Valerian bursts into Derek's room and confronts him, yelling and calling him a mercenary. Our MC, however, is sitting calmly reading a book, unfazed by the shouting. The blonde man tries to attack Derek, but Reg holds him back forcefully, telling him to calm down and talk. The young mage simply explains that everything he did was permitted by the Grand Duke. Reg reinforces that the young man is Azeline's guest and that their father agreed to all of this. He then drags Valerian out of the room and tells the MC to mind his own business and not interfere. With a smile on his face, Reg tells Derek not to worry, because Diala really needs a lesson to bring her to her senses. The MC watches the young noble in silence, a bit surprised by the unexpected support. As Valerian is pulled away, Reg complains about him protecting that hopeless girl. The scene cuts to a dark hallway where some dolls are sitting on the floor, creating a very creepy vibe. At the door to Diala's room, Valerian and Derek prepare to enter and tell the person inside to receive them. Valerian explains that this was the room Diala used in the main house and that the place has remained untouched since then. Our MC approaches a canvas and observes an unfinished painting of a landscape. The blonde man says that the young noble loved to draw and that her face would turn red whenever she asked him to look at her drawings. However, he reveals that Diala never finished her paintings and used to leave blank spaces, only drawing the parts she liked. Immediately after, Valerian apologizes for losing his temper earlier, but Derek tells him not to worry about it. The young mage then looks at the various paintings scattered around the room and asks why he was brought there. With a sad expression, the man replies that he wanted to show that Diala wasn't always a child who deserved to be despised, but that at some point, she became obsessed with her bloodline. Because of this, she ended up being expelled from the main house and locked in the annex. While the MC wonders what could have caused this change in her, he continues, saying that they need to prevent the girl from being sent to a monastery, and that if she learns to use 1-star magic, he can convince their father. Desperate, Valerian grabs the young man's shoulders and begs him to save Diala. Our MC, however, asks him to wait, as he seems to have noticed something important in the books. He explains that judging by the notes in the margins, Diala hasn't completely given up on magic. The boy then asks if those are theory books from the School of Regulations, and the man confirms that it's what nobles usually learn. With this new information, Derek begins to understand the young noble's situation better. The scene shows another unfinished painting, this time of a forest with sunbeams passing through the trees. Derek holds the theory book firmly, seeming to have found an important clue. He turns to Valerian and, with a determined look, says he will try to help the girl. Night arrives, and the bedroom curtains are drawn, setting the stage for the first lesson. In her bed, Diala sleeps peacefully, unaware of what is about to happen. Suddenly, a bucket of cold water is unceremoniously dumped on her. The young noble wakes up with a jolt, screaming in shock and completely soaked. Our MC stares at her with the empty bucket and sarcastically asks if she was sleeping. Diala is furious at his attitude and questions if the young man has completely lost his mind. Without giving her time for more complaints, the young mage grabs her by the arm while she screams for him to let her go. He drags her through the palace corridors and the desperate girl tells the maids to stop that commoner. The MC takes her outside the residence toward a dark trail in the forest. Arriving there, he throws her forcefully to the ground, and the young woman cries out in pain and surprise. Lying on the grass, Diela glares at him with hatred and asks who he thinks he is to dare to teach her. Derek then approaches and asks if she wants to hear an interesting fact, leaving her confused. With a cruel smile and his eyes glowing red, he reveals that he has no intention of teaching her magic because he only enjoys beating up arrogant nobles. Diela is completely paralyzed and in shock, unable to believe what she just heard. He continues, saying there's no reason for someone like him to like nobles, and that being a tutor is just an excuse. An excuse for him to finally take out his anger on arrogant nobles like her. Right after, the young man draws his sword and comments that he loves hearing the screams of noble folk. The girl scrambles backward, terrified, but still confronts him, asking if he thinks he'll get away with this. Our MC, with a mocking smile, replies that yes, because she'll be sent to a monastery anyway, and no one would believe her word. He adds that if something goes wrong, he can just pay with his life, since a commoner's life isn't worth much. Or he could simply run away and still do the Duplane family a favor by getting rid of the headache that she is. Faced with the situation, the young noble understands that if he catches her, she definitely won't make it out alive. Without a second thought, she gets up and runs toward the forest, knowing she doesn't stand a chance if she heads for the residence. Her only option is to lose him in the forest to have any chance of survival. The girl knows this area well and plans to use her knowledge so that he's the only one who doesn't leave here alive. As she runs desperately, she notices something strange coming quickly toward her. Suddenly, a huge fireball flies past her, illuminating the entire dark forest. It turns out Derek used magic to attack her, showing that the chase has gotten much more serious. Lying on the ground, the young noble is completely shocked to recognize the attack as a fireball. She is even more surprised because she knows that spell is 2-star magic and doesn't understand how a commoner can use something so powerful. Our MC looks at her with a confident smile on his face, showing that he has the situation under control. Right after, the attack explodes very close to her, creating a circle of flames around her. The sudden explosion leaves the girl completely terrified by what just happened. The force of the impact throws her forward, and the young noble screams in pain and despair. Behind her, a massive explosion lights up the entire forest, showing the power of Derek's attack. On the ground and completely terrified, the girl swallows hard, not knowing what to do. The young mage approaches with a cruel smile and says it looks like he missed the target on purpose. Realizing she has no time to waste, the noblewoman quickly gets up and continues her desperate escape. With an expression of panic and determination, she runs as fast as she can to try to get away. However, in her haste, the girl ends up tripping on a tree root in the middle of the path. The trip throws her off balance, and she falls hard to the ground, unable to brace for the impact. Still on the ground and hurt, she groans in pain and notices a blue mana arrow coming toward her. The mana arrow glows brightly in the dark of night, ready to hit the young noble dead on. With her eyes wide, the young noble sees the mana arrow approaching rapidly. In a quick move, she manages to roll to the side and narrowly dodge the attack. The energy arrow embeds itself in the ground right beside her, leaving the girl completely terrified by the situation. Our MC then comments that she's pretty fast, and that he didn't expect that agility from someone who lives locked up. Though scared, the young noble looks at him with a determined gaze and takes a deep breath to catch her breath. Without wasting any time, the girl gets up and starts running through the forest again while Derek watches her calmly. A slight smile appears on the young mage's face, who seems to be enjoying the chase. As she runs, Diela starts to wonder how long she can keep running, knowing that at this rate, he'll catch her. Desperation begins to take over the girl as she realizes her chances of escape are getting smaller and smaller. Our MC then kneels and places his hand on the ground, using his mana to sense the surroundings. He looks toward a specific trail in the forest as if he knows exactly where she went. At that moment, Derek remembers the paintings and realizes that this is the same forest Diela used to draw. He understands that she must have run through this place since she was a child and, without realizing it, felt the mana of nature and transferred it to her canvases. With a determined look, the young mage realizes that his theory about the girl's talent is correct. Suddenly, the young noble appears with a huge rock in her hands and screams as she prepares to attack the MC by surprise. Unfazed by the surprise attack, he simply raises his sword, which glows with a bluish light. With a swift move, Derek easily blocks the rock, causing it to ricochet far away. The young noble is completely paralyzed, unable to believe her attack was useless. Our MC then praises her fighting spirit, since instead of running, the girl decided decided to counter-attack even knowing it would be difficult. Lying on the ground, Diala breathes heavily, completely out of energy to continue. The young man notices her condition and comments that the young noble doesn't even have the strength to run anymore. He then points his sword at Diala and asks if she has any last words. The girl lets out a weak, mocking laugh, even in the face of such a dangerous situation. She then looks at him and says she won't beg like a commoner and tells him to just get it over with. Derek, without changing his expression, questions her about the reason for her obsession with her bloodline. Diala looks away for a moment, seeming to reflect on his question. In a sad voice, she reveals that if you take away her noble bloodline, she'll have nothing left. In a fit of rage, the girl begins to scream about magic repeatedly. With tears in her eyes, the young noble asks if he really thinks she never tried to learn. Derek remains silent, just watching the girl have an emotional breakdown in front of him. Lying on the ground, she screams that no matter how hard she tries, nothing works, and that she's being left behind in everything. The young noble wonders what would be left of her besides her bloodline, and that if even that is taken from her, there will be nothing left. On her knees and in complete despair, she questions who she would be without her noble status. Our MC just watches her in silence, processing the girl's outburst. Right after, the young man's sword begins to glow again with an intense blue energy. With a tear streaming down her face, Diala seems to accept her fate, with no strength left to react. The young mage then raises his sword and says he's heard enough. She stares at the blade with tear-filled eyes, preparing for the worst. In a swift and precise move, he swings his sword downward with all his might. The girl squeezes her eyes shut, waiting for the final blow that would end it all. She keeps waiting for the impact, but to her surprise, nothing happens. It turns out the sword stopped when it hit a huge block of ice that formed in front of her. Diala opens her eyes, confused, upon seeing the wall of ice that protected her from the attack. The scene reveals Derek standing on the other side, while the young noble looks at the barrier she herself created. Completely shocked, she stares at her own hands, which are glowing with a blue aura, and wonders if that is really magic. Our MC then smoothly sheathes his sword. He then bows slightly and congratulates Diala on a job well done, apologizing for his rudeness. The girl continues to cry silently, completely shocked by what just happened. The young man explains that it wasn't exactly magic, but just a manifestation of mana, but that she still managed to do it. The young noble lets out a groan of exhaustion and pain after all the physical and emotional effort. Immediately after, she begins to cry uncontrollably, releasing all the frustration she had bottled up for so long. Derek just watches her from a distance as the girl has an emotional breakdown, surrounded by the ice crystals. Sometime later, the two are sitting on a log, and the young mage reveals that she belongs to the School of Nature, leaving Diala confused. He explains that most nobles learn through the School of Regulations, and that although all magic is the same, the way of learning it is very different. He says that trying to learn magic with the wrong theory was the cause of her problems, as it was like forcing on clothes that didn't fit her. With this new perspective, Diala asks how he found out about her affinity for the School of Nature. The young man reveals that he saw the drawing she made and noticed that the girl could feel the mana of nature and transfer that energy to her canvases. He adds that mages with the temperament of the School of Nature tend to feel the mana of the environment from a very young age. The girl is surprised by the revelation, as she finally understands the reason for all her difficulties with magic. Standing up, Derek says that's enough and that she should be able to walk now. Seeming satisfied with the result of that first lesson, the young mage starts to walk away and says that she managed to manifest mana, but she still has a long way to go, and that starting tomorrow, he will teach her how to do it naturally. The noble girl then calls his name, and the young man turns slightly to face her. With her arms crossed and a little embarrassed, Diala thanks him for the help she received. Our MC remains silent for a moment, seeming surprised by her sudden gratitude. Soon after, he calls for her to leave, and the two begin to walk back to the residence. As they walk, Derek asks about a painting of a sunset, and the girl reveals that it was her masterpiece, and that he was the first to realize it was finished. The next day, sunlight illuminates Diala's room, marking the beginning of a new day of training. The young noble is already awake in her bed and seems to be trying to practice what she learned the night before. She concentrates hard, and a blue mana aura begins to form around her hand. Her gaze shows all the girl's determination to finally be able to use real magic. However, the mana dissipates into smoke, and she admits to herself that it's very difficult to control. At that very moment, a maid approaches the bedroom door with a bucket of water in her hands. Suddenly, Diala throws the door open, and the servant screams, completely startled by her appearance. In her fright, the bucket of water falls from the maid's hands and spills onto the floor. The water spreads around the young noble's feet, who continues with her mana activated, not noticing what happened. Completely terrified, the maid apologizes to Diala, expecting the worst. The young noble glares at her with a cold, intimidating look, without saying a single word. Because of this, the servant throws herself on the floor and begs for forgiveness, saying she has committed a sin worthy of death. However, to everyone's surprise, Diala just tells the maid to be more careful next time. The girl on the floor is confused about what's happening and wonders why she wasn't hit. Soon after, other servants approach and help her up, wondering what happened to Diella the night before to make her change so much. Meanwhile, in another room, our MC is sleeping peacefully in his bed. Suddenly, his bedroom door starts being pounded on, and a voice shouts his name, waking him up very abruptly. The young mage gets up sleepily and rubs his eyes, trying to understand what's happening. It turns out Diella has barged into the room with Dylan, and while the butler scolds her, she demands that Derek teach her how to control her mana. Upon hearing that, Dylan is completely shocked, unable to believe that the young noble has manifested mana. The girl ignores him and insists that the MC teach her immediately, as he promised. Our MC, however, simply tells her to come back in the afternoon and slams the door in her face. Dylan is moved and even cries with joy at seeing his lady's interest, while Diella is furious with the young man's attitude. Not giving up, she goes back to pounding on the door, shouting for him to open up and teach her right now. Outside, the girl continues to shout and curse, but our MC simply turns over in bed and ignores her. The morning continues in the huge, luxurious residence of the Duplane family. Meanwhile, through the palace corridors, rumors about Dilla's change are already starting to spread. Two maids comment that the young noble hasn't broken a single plate, and one of them confirms that she spilled water and didn't get hit for it. The gossip gets even better when one reveals that Diella managed to use magic, and the news reaches the ears of Reg, who was passing by. Upon hearing that, the young noble stops walking immediately, unable to believe what he just heard. He turns to the servants with a serious expression and asks what they just said. The rumor spreads so fast that it doesn't take long to reach the office of the head of the family. In the Grand Duke's office, Reg and Aisline meet with their father, who asks if it's true that Diella manifested magic, and the young man confirms the story. The older man adjusts his glasses and shows clear relief upon receiving the news. Reg, however, remains skeptical and says they shouldn't jump to conclusions. Just because of this, Aisline gets annoyed with her brother's attitude and scolds him, saying he should be praising his sister. The Grand Duke just watches the argument between his children in complete silence. Reg is unfazed and argues that such a small result isn't enough to forget what Diella has caused, and that this shouldn't stop her from going to the convent. Faced with these arguments, the head of House Duplane becomes thoughtful and goes back to writing without giving a definitive answer. Later that day, Diella is sitting with her back to him, her cheeks puffed out. Our MC then approaches and asks if the girl is pouting at him. The young noble replies without turning around that she isn't pouting, but very angry. The young man runs a hand through his hair and says that acting resentful won't change the situation at all. She insists that she isn't being resentful, and that what she feels is real anger. Derek calmly explains that even if she continues to throw a tantrum, there's nothing to be done, because there's an order to everything. Faced with the situation, the girl loses her patience completely and yells that she's not throwing a tantrum and that she already said she's angry. The young mage just looks at her with a serious expression, unfazed by her fit. Suddenly, the noble's attitude changes completely, and she kneels in front of him with a mischievous smile, saying, "All right then, let's just say I'm throwing a tantrum." The young man then turns and picks up a nearby book. Sitting in a chair, he explains this just because she managed to use magic doesn't mean she can go around using it, as it could backfire on her. Diella looks at him with a bored expression and calls him a lame magic teacher, but Derek ignores her and says that rest is as important as learning. Provoked, the MC's eyes glow an intense red, and he asks if she wants him to teach her in a way that isn't claim. The girl then remembers the chase in the forest and the fear she felt when he attacked her. Scared, the young noble quickly sits down and tells him to forget what she said, changing her mind on the spot. Derek begins the day's lesson and explains that they will practice manifesting magic and that once she masters that, she will be able to learn 1-star spells. The young man continues, saying that the School of Nature doesn't have a rigid system and therefore seeks freedom much more than the School of Regulations. Thus, he reveals that, to be honest, the girl fits this style of magic very well, but Diella gets embarrassed and asks what he's talking about. The young mage explains that her free, spirited nature has a great compatibility with the school, and on top of that, her Duplane blood makes her very talented. Completely embarrassed, the young noble asks if he's really saying she has talent. He confirms the theory and says that if she managed to create an ice wall the moment she manifested mana, then she is definitely overflowing with talent, and the girl gets all excited, asking if she's some kind of genius. Our MC, however, bursts her bubble, saying that having talent and being a genius are very different things, and after a short argument, the girl finally gives in and praises him. Meanwhile, outside the residence, Reg watches the scene from a distance and thinks about what to do now that his sister has finally managed to manifest magic. The young noble is visibly irritated by the situation and clicks his tongue in a clear sign of disapproval. The scene then cuts to the next day, showing that Diella's training has finally begun. The girl bursts into her tutor's room, all excited, and says she can manifest magic, but can't get the direction right. The next day, she finds him eating and complains that she tried to add the cold attribute to her mana, but that the sensation still feels strange. The pursuit continues the following day, with the young noble chasing Derek Derek through the palace corridors to ask another one of her questions. Days later, the MC is reading peacefully under a tree when Diella finds him and shouts, asking what he's doing there. With her hands on her hips, the girl scolds him for being away from the annex and asks if he thinks her father gave him the spellbooks just to slack off. Unfazed, our MC replies that yes, because the Grand Duke lent him the books for that exact purpose. The noble girl, however, says that she managed to make the magic flow as he instructed, and that now he needs to check her progress. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Valerian is standing by the window with a very thoughtful expression. Suddenly, his bedroom door slowly opens, revealing an unexpected visitor. Derek enters the room, and the blonde man asks if he called for him, and the young man invites him to sit and talk. Once seated, Valerian gets straight to the point and asks how Diella has been doing in her training. The young mage explains that she has made good progress, but that learning one-star magic will still take some time. Valerian understands the situation and mentions that his mother, who went to a social gathering, is expected to return next week. He warns in advance that she is not someone to be underestimated, as nobles don't like commoners in important positions. Our MC replies that he will keep that in mind and asks if that's why he was called there. The blonde man is silent for a moment before continuing his explanation. He stands up and reveals that as the next head of House Duplane, he needs to be sincere with all members to truly include them. However, he admits that this is very difficult because a person's heart can be deep, and it would be great if everyone shared the same values. But reality is different. The young man is a bit confused by the conversation and asks directly what Valerian is trying to say. With a clenched fist, the man turns with a determined expression, ready to reveal the true reason for their conversation. With a dramatic expression, the blonde man reveals that the big problem is that Diella doesn't play with him anymore. Our MC stares at him with an expression of pure boredom, not caring one bit about his drama. Valerian continues his monologue and says he still remembers how she used to greet him with a smile when they were little, and that she was a true angel, while the young man just sips his tea. The blonde man then approaches and asks Derek for a way to win his sister's favor, but the young mage questions why he's asking him that. He then explains that the reason is that the young man is the only one Diella follows around, as shown by a memory of the girl shouting her tutor's name. Valerian then asks him to look at something he made and reveals that he learned how to make dolls from the maids. With great pride, he shows off a very weird-looking doll and asks if it doesn't look like Diella and if the young mage can feel the big brotherly love in it. Faced with that bizarre scene, Derek glares at him with a dark look and asks if he's trying to curse someone. Upon hearing that, the blonde man starts to cry, completely devastated by the response he received. He then complains that the young man is completely useless for this kind of thing, and the scene cuts to outside the residence. Sometime later, our MC is in a hall surrounded by staff when an elderly lady says she's heard a lot about him. The older woman continues with a smile and comments that they found a very capable magic teacher. She then introduces herself as Dival Mariella Duplane and offers a gift from her territory as a welcoming gesture. The young man, however, bluntly replies that he is not affiliated with any noble house. Dival is completely confused by the response and asks him to repeat what he just said. Our MC replies straightforwardly that he is a commoner. The older woman is completely shocked by the revelation and can hardly believe that he is a commoner. The scene then shows us the grand residence of the Duplane family. Inside, the young man is received by an elderly lady who says she has already heard about him. With a smile on her face, she comments that they found a very competent magic teacher. The woman then introduces herself as Mariella Dival Duplane and offers a gift as a token of gratitude. The young mage, however, refuses the offer and says he does not belong to any noble house. The noblewoman is confused by his response and asks the young man to explain what he meant. With a serious look, he reveals once and for all that he is just a commoner. The revelation leaves the woman completely speechless and shocked by the new tutor's origins. The story then takes us to 1 week before all this confusion. At that time, Aceline was saying goodbye to Derek and saying she was happy to have brought him to the residence. With a smile, the young woman explains that as the older sister, she wanted to stay longer but needs to return to Ibelstein, and so she is leaving everything in his hands. Our MC simply nods and says he understands the situation. Suddenly, Jaden approaches and puts his arm around the young man's shoulder, scolding him for his lifeless response when Aceline is entrusting her sister to him. The man then tells the young man to finish the job quickly because if Pelin finds out, she'll make a scene, and says he's counting on him. The carriage departs, and our MC watches in silence as his guildmates leave. Suddenly, Aceline remembers something important, and Jaden asks what's wrong. The young noble reveals with concern that her mother will be returning next week, and that she forgot to tell Derek about it. The guild master doesn't understand her concern, but Aceline hesitates to give more details. The scene then takes us to the residence of the Duplane family. Aceline reveals that her mother is like a goddess furious of rage. The scene then shows Mariella yelling at the Grand Duke about a commoner being Diela's teacher. The head of the family looks at her calmly and asks her to lower her voice, as he can hear her just fine. The woman, however, ignores the request and continues to yell that the problem is their beloved youngest daughter. The Grand Duke takes off his glasses and explains that, as she knows, he doesn't like to appoint commoners to important positions. He argues that all the teachers with good bloodlines have already given up on Diela, but the woman remains dissatisfied and questions how he could hire a former mercenary. The older man reinforces that it's not easy to find a good magic teacher and that Derek was recommended by Aisline. Mariella is still not convinced and says there needs to be a certain standard for this type of position. Suddenly, the woman remembers her younger brother named Flam and says that now that Diela has manifested magic, he could come and teach her. The Grand Duke questions her idea and asks if she thinks she can pull the person who manages the territory to be a private tutor, and if the command of Ebelstein can be handled so carelessly. Mariella becomes furious and shouts about Ebelstein's social circle, saying that it's a war zone too. Pointing at her husband, she reinforces that socially, a teacher matters more than anything, and that a commoner with no family name would make Diela a laughingstock in high society. At this moment, Valerian tries to calm his mother, asking her to calm down because she didn't come here to fight with his father. The older woman, however, tells him to get out of the way, saying this is something they cannot simply ignore. Raig then joins the conversation and says that in the end, the question is whether that commoner mage has the qualifications to be Diela's teacher. The woman looks at Raig with a smile, seeming to like her son's idea. The young noble continues, saying that a commoner becoming a noble's teacher is not normal, but if the young man has the necessary qualifications, there won't be a problem. Given the situation, Raig offers to test Derek's qualifications personally and suggests a magic duel to settle the matter. The Grand Duke, however, cuts the conversation short and says that's enough, as the young man is a real and very powerful mage. Raig looks frustrated but doesn't dare to contradict his father's decision, so he changes tactics and suggests they test Diela instead of her tutor. Valerian is completely confused by his brother's new proposal, not understanding what he's planning. The young man explains that if Derek is such a good teacher, then Diela must have had great results, and that he will personally duel her to verify her progress. The head of House Duplane remains silent, analyzing his son's unexpected proposal. After the meeting, Valerian runs after Raig and shouts his name, trying to understand what he's doing. The blonde man questions him about the magic duel, unable to believe his brother's crazy idea. The young noble then turns and asks if he really believes Diela has changed and reminds him of everything she did in the past. Valerian, however, argues that she is still his only sister and that they need to protect her because she is their blood. Raig lets out a mocking laugh upon hearing the word blood. In a rage, he yells that it's precisely this blood that is trying to bring down their house and that if she debits in high society like this, it will be the end of the family. The blonde man is shocked by his brother's words and questions if that's how he really feels. The young noble turns his back and says that Diela was the first to cross the line and that it's best for her to remain locked in the annex. Valerian is silent, completely speechless in the face of his brother's determination. Raig glares at him with a cold, determined look, showing that he will not back down from his decision. The scene then takes us to the next day, where a bird is singing at the window. Suddenly, Diela bursts into Derek's room once again, all excited and shouting his name. Our MC, who was reading a book, looks at her with a bored expression and asks what she wants so early. The girl then throws a scroll into his lap, revealing the news about the magic duel. With her arms crossed, the young noble looks at him with a serious expression and says that if she loses this duel, he's fired. Unfazed, our MC confirms that he's already heard the news and adds that young Master Raig is an experienced one-star mage, so it will probably be difficult for her to win. The young noble is furious at his calmness and yells that's all he has to say, as his job is on the line. With a slight smile, the young man reminds her that he's a mercenary and that he simply does the job he was hired for and collects the payment that comes with it. He then adds that he has already been paid more than enough for this service. The girl is completely surprised by his response and asks if the young man is being serious. A week passes and the banner of House Duplane flutters in the wind. The scene takes us to the training arena, where several people have gathered to watch the duel. The Grand Duke and his wife walk toward the combat site, with their servants accompanying them. Upon arriving at the location, the head of the family finds Derek and says, "Good, you came." Our MC gives a slight bow as a sign of respect to the noble. The older man analyzes him and notices that the young man doesn't seem nervous at all, wondering if it's confidence. Given the situation, the noble sits down and thinks that the young man has a lot of courage and that, as he imagined, he is not someone they should dismiss just yet. On the other side of the arena, Raig walks toward the center of the battlefield. With a clenched fist, the young noble prepares for the duel that is about to begin. With a determined look, he reveals to himself that this will not be a simple magic duel, because today he is going to break Diela completely. Climbing the arena stairs, Raig promises himself that he will make Diela regret everything she has done. Next, the young noble also enters the arena wearing a red hood and prepares for the confrontation with her brother. The story takes us to a moment before the duel, where Yahello questions Derek if he really doesn't care what happens as long as he gets paid. The young man explains that, as she must have noticed, her magical growth is on the right track, and that it won't be long before she can use 1-star magic. He attributes her progress to her Duplane blood, and the girl is confused, asking why he's saying that all of a sudden. Our MC then reminds her of what he said before about the School of Nature, which focuses on self-study rather than rigid rules. With tears in her eyes, the young noble shouts and asks why he is saying this kind of thing right now. The young maid just remains silent for a moment, letting the girl vent. Yahello then admits that she knows she's not a great student but that she still wants to keep learning. In tears, the girl begs him to continue being her teacher because she doesn't want anyone else. Derek remains with his back to her, listening to his student's desperate plea. Adjusting his glove, he warns her in advance that he doesn't know the etiquette or rules of magic duels between nobles, as he has never participated in one. However, he says he can teach her how to win a fight and asks if that's what she wants. The scene then shows a flashback of Yahello's past, where she was surrounded by malicious whispers about her lack of talent for magic. The gossip continues to haunt her, with people comparing her to her siblings and treating her as a burden to the family. With tears in her eyes but with a determined expression, the girl accepts her master's offer and asks him to make her win at any cost. Because she isn't there to fight as Raig's younger sister, and certainly not as the youngest of House Duplane. At that moment she was standing there solely as Derek's student and as a true mage, ready to prove her worth.